Hi everyone, this is Amy again. I want to keep talking a little bit about chemistry, but I'd like to go ahead and touch on this idea of DNA and RNA really quick. I think I rushed that at the end of the last one. Here is a diagram of DNA. Remember we said that DNA had two strands. Each of these colored squares represents one of the four nucleotides. Okay, remember we said there were four nucleotides, A and T, which pair together, and C and G, which pair together. And in each DNA strand you'll have one strand here and the other there, and they stick together based on this complementary pairing that you see here. So I'm going to give you an example of a DNA strand. So if this is DNA, and you are given one strand, let's say T, A, C, C, G, A, T, A. All right? Because DNA always has two strands, you can tell me what the complementary strand would be. If T always pairs with A, then we know that the next strand would be A, T, G, G, C, T, A, T. Do you see that? So each DNA strand has two copies, or each molecule of DNA has two strands, and those complementary strands are based on the pairing between these nucleotides. All right, remember we also said that, let me erase this for you, we also said that DNA was housed inside the nucleus. That's a great place to keep it, except when you need to make proteins somewhere out here in the cytoplasm. And so what do we use to get the message from the nucleus out into the cytoplasm? Well, we use RNA. Okay, now RNA is single-stranded. It only has one strand, and it's used or read to make the protein. But let's see how we do that. Let's say, as an example, we have our double-stranded DNA molecule here. Right, it has all of the complementary pairs. Well, what we have to do inside the nucleus is that you have to open up this double-stranded DNA molecule. And let's say that our DNA here reads A, T, C, G, C, C, A, like that. All right, so that's DNA. We have to create an RNA strand, and I'm going to change colors to try to make this easier to read for you. Go to blue. The complementary strand to make the RNA, normally it would be a T that would pair here with the A, right? But remember we said that RNA doesn't have a T, it has a U instead. So this strand for RNA would be U, would be U, A, G, C, G, G, U. And that would be our RNA strand that would make its way out into the cytoplasm to be used as instructions to make the protein. Let's see here. Let me show you one quick thing before we skip this part. I'm going to erase it all. And I'm going to show you just this basic idea. One thing to do to keep all this straight is to remember that, DNA is used to make RNA, and RNA is used to make protein. Proteins are made up of amino acids. That's the subunit for proteins. And so what RNA does is that it codes for individual amino acids. And all these amino acids fold up together in certain arrangements to make the proteins, the muscle proteins, the transport proteins, the receptors, all the things that we talked about in the last video that proteins are used for. But this is a really important thing to remember. DNA is converted or is used to make an RNA copy. RNA moves out into the cytoplasm where it's used to make protein. Now I'm going to jump ahead and show you one additional thing. One of the main nucleotides in DNA, remember we had A, T, C, and G. So this A nucleotide is called adenine, but this adenine can get modified in something totally separate from RNA, but the molecule itself can be modified into something called ATP, which stands for adenosine tri, meaning 3, phosphate. And this is also called ATP. ATP is a hugely important molecule for us in this class because ATP is used for cellular energy. Anything that the cell needs to do, it has to do through ATP. So the question should be, why in the world is ATP such a great source of energy? And I'm going to show you. This is a great picture to show us that. So in ATP, we have this adenosine, which is the modification of that nucleotide, that A nucleotide. It has a sugar attached, but it also has these 3 phosphate molecules. These phosphate molecules, that's a particular atom, phosphorus, and it has some oxygens with it. But the important part is that these molecules are very large and they're very negatively charged. So what happens when 2 negative sides of 2 magnets are tried to put together? What happens if you try to put both of those negative sides together? They repel each other, right? Magnets only stick together if you have the positive end of one and the negative end of the other, and then they stick together great. But if you try to put 2 negative ends together, they'll repel each other and they won't even touch. That's happening with ATP as well. So these 3 phosphate groups want nothing except to try to get away from each other. Because they want to get away from each other, how strong do you think those bonds have to be that are holding those 3 phosphates together? Let me change color here. Those bonds have to be really, really strong because all the phosphates want to do is to get away from each other. So ATP ends up becoming a huge source of energy because of these chemical bonds that are having to work so hard to hold these phosphate groups together. So what happens in our body cells is that our cells can take advantage of all of that energy that's housed inside of those bonds between the phosphate groups. And what our body can do is it can take an ATP molecule and it can break that bond right there. And when it breaks that bond, huge amounts of energy are released because that bond doesn't have to work anymore to hold those phosphate groups together. So this ATP can get broken into an ADP, so adenosine diphosphate, when you cut one of them off, plus now that single phosphate that's hanging out by itself, plus a huge amount of energy. This energy is used by our body cells to do work. So ATP is really important for everything that happens in our body, particularly things that involve movement, transport of molecules from one place to the other, movement of muscles, movement of ions in and out of a membrane. All of this stuff depends on ATP. So I want you to understand that ATP is related to the nucleic acid group because it is a modification of that A nucleotide from DNA. So please remember that ATP is converted or broken into ADP plus phosphate plus energy. And it's this energy that is captured by the cell to do large amounts of work. I hope that makes sense, and let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.